Hello everyone. Welcome to Neso Academy. We are learning theory of computation. And in the previous lecture, we have understood what is an automata, and I also told you the four different types of automata: finite automata, push-down automata, linear bound automata, and Turing machines. And now in this lecture, that is Introduction to Finite Automata, we are going to begin with our very first type of automata, that is finite automata. So in this lecture, we have only one topic to discuss, and that is finite automata. So let's get started. Now, before going into what is finite automata, let's take a quick recap of what we have studied in automata. In automata, we have studied that automata is a mathematical model of any machine that processes an input string by moving through a sequence of states according to defined transition rules. And finite automata is almost similar to automata with a very slight change. That means finite automata is also a mathematical model or a diagrammatic representation of any machine to solve a computational problem that processes an input string taking only one symbol at a time by moving through a sequence of states according to the defined transition rules. And in finite automata also, if the computation or the processing of this input string reaches the accepting state, it means our input string is accepted. Otherwise, our input string is rejected. So I hope you are clear with the basics of finite automata. Now let's talk about that slight change between finite automata and the automata in general. So finite automata is the type of automata that has a very limited memory. So I have written that in a finite automaton, the word finite means that the machine has a limited number of states, that is, limited memory. It cannot store or remember unlimited information. Now, what does that mean? This point simply means that finite automata has a limited or finite number of states, and that is why it has a very limited or a small amount of memory. In the previous lecture, I have already told you that the memory capability of finite automata is very less as compared to the other types of automata, like push-down automata or Turing machines. And that is the reason why finite automata cannot store or remember unlimited information. Finite automata can solve only a few variety of problems. Finite automata cannot solve the problems including the memory involvement because it cannot retain the data inside its memory because it has a very small memory or even no external memory. Now, when I say that finite automata has a very limited number of states or finite number of states, it does not mean that the other types of automata like push-down automata or Turing machines have infinite number of states. They also have a finite number of states, but they also have an extra memory element with them. Like if we talk about push-down automata, it has a memory stack, which acts as a source of memory for it. And in Turing machine, we have an infinite length tape, which also acts as a source of memory. But in case of finite automata, there is no such extra memory element. These states are the only source of that memory, and that is why it has a very limited or a very small amount of memory. I hope this point is very much clear now. Now let's take an example to understand finite automata. So here we have an example of finite automata. This is the state number 1, which is also called as the initial state of finite automata, and it is represented by an inward arrow and a circle. These two are the intermediate states of the finite automata, and this is the final state or the accepting state of finite automata, which is represented by double circles. Now this state is very new to you. This is called as dead state. Dead state is a state from which you cannot go to any other state. That means dead state has no transition to any other state. Once you reach the dead state, you cannot go to any other state. Now, these lowercase letters are called as the input symbols, and these arrows represent the transition from one state to another state, which is defined by the transition rules. So, transition rules tell us that which state will be the next state on the basis of current state and the current input symbol. Now, I hope this diagram is very much clear to you. Now, it is inconvenient to always write state 1, state 2, state 3, accepting state, dead state, and so on. So instead of this, we can even use a shorter representation for states. Like we can use the uppercase letters to represent the states, like A, B, C, D, E, and so on. But this method also lacks the proper numbering of states. So we have another representation also, which is the most commonly used representation for identifying the states. And that is when we use the lowercase alphabet q along with the state number as Q0, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and so on. So this was the example of finite automata. Now it's the time to test this finite automata. I hope you all remember that during the previous lecture, I told you that while processing an input string, there are two possibilities. If the input string processing reaches the accepting state, then our automata will accept that input string. But during the processing of input string, if the processing completes at a state other than the accepting state, that means our automata will reject that input string. Now, we will take few input strings and we will check whether that input string will be accepted or rejected by the given finite automata. So let's take our very first string, A, B, A, B, B. Now, we will check whether this string is accepted or rejected by this automata. But before that, we need to store this particular string. And to store this particular string, we have an input tape in finite automata, in which we store this input string symbol by symbol. So our finite automata will take one symbol from this input tape at a time and will process that symbol. So now let's start the processing of this input string. But it is to be noted that the processing of input string will start from left to right. And in this finite automata, the processing of input string will always start from the initial state. So our first symbol is A and we are at the initial state Q0. Now from Q0, there are two possible transitions, this transition and this transition. But since our input symbol is A, we cannot select this transition. That is why there will be a transition from Q0 to Q1. Now we are at the state Q1 and the next input symbol is B. So we will follow this transition and we will reach the state Q2. Now we are at the state Q2 and the next input symbol is A. So we will follow this transition and we will finally reach our accepting state Q4. Now, will the automata stop the processing of this input string as we have reached the accepting state? No, because still there are two symbols left to get processed. So now we are at the state Q4 and the next input symbol is B. So following this transition, we will remain at the same state, that is Q4. Again, our next symbol is B and we are at the state Q4. So we will follow the same transition and we will again come back to the same state, or we can say that we remain at the same state. Now the processing of input string is completed and we are at Q4, which is an accepting state. That means this input string is accepted by this automaton. Now let's take another example. This time our input string is A, B, 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 B. And our input tape will look like this. So the first symbol is A and we are at the initial state Q0. Following this transition, we will reach state Q1. Next symbol is B, so we will follow this transition and we will reach state Q0. Next symbol is again B, and here we cannot select this transition. We will select this transition and we will come to Q1. Now the next symbol is also B, so we will again go to state Q2, and at last our symbol is B, so we will select this transition and we will come back again to the Q1 state. Now the input string processing stops at the state Q1, which is not an accepting state. That is why this particular string will be rejected by our automaton. Now let's take the third example. This time the input string is BA, BAA, which is represented like this in our input tape. Now let's start its processing. Again, we start from the initial state Q0. The first symbol is B, and we are at the state Q0. Since the symbol is B, we cannot select this transition. We will select this transition and we will come to state Q3. Now Q3 is a dead state, and I already told you that there is no transition from dead state. And our input symbols A, B, A are left to get processed. But since machine has no other transition, that means these symbols will not be processed. And that is why our string BA, BAA will get rejected by this automaton. So I hope you are clear with this example. Now, as you know how finite automata processes an input string, let me give you a homework problem. So this is a finite automata and these are 3 strings. And you need to find out which of the following strings are accepted by this given finite automata. So we have just discussed this topic and I think you can solve this question very easily. Once you solve this question, don't forget to post your answer in the comment section. So in this way, we have completed our topic, finite automata. So this was all from my side for this lecture. Thank you and I'll see you in the next lecture.